Gerudo are a parasitic species. It is not a theory, it's a statement of fact. I am of course speaking from the perspective of science, biology, specifically biology. There of course is such a thing as a societal parasite, but that is not what we will be discussing for now. This video will be divided into two main parts. First, we will discuss Gerudo biology based on their in-game appearances. Then, we will look at the meaning of that biology for Gerudo Culture and the rest of Hyrule, based on both what is actually shown within the game and pure speculation on my part. So, what is a parasite? In the simplest terms, a parasitic organism is one that depends on other organisms for survival, while not providing anything in return and often to the detriment of the other organism. At first glance, Gerudo don't seem to fit this definition at all. Like, look at them. Does this strong and independent hot woman look like she needs anyone's help to get by? No, of course not. She's easily capable of fending for herself. So why would I say such an offensive thing? Gerudo parasitic? Why never? Well, it's just not that simple. The important part to understand here is what survival means in the context of biology. It can mean the survival of an individual, of course, but it could also mean the survival of the species. And herein lies the core of the issue. You know what is the most basic thing a species needs to survive? It's the ability to reproduce. And what do Gerudo lack? The ability to reproduce by themselves. This makes them parasitic. They require assistance of other humanoids in order to secure their continued survival. On a societal level, they don't provide those humanoids with anything in return, and an argument could be made that, if anything, they are actively hurting those societies with their activity. That's not all. There is much more that can be deduced, even just from the way they look. Our earlier classification can be specified. Gerudo are parasitic mimics. This tells us a lot about how this race evolved and how it fits within Hyrule. Let me explain. This is a Gerudo. This is a Hylian. And this is a Sheikah. Mimicry is a visual resemblance between two different species. It can serve a few different functions, but in case of parasitic mimicry, it provides the parasite with an advantage and helps it achieve its goal. For worms, it may be getting eaten. For cuckoos, it's scaring smaller birds away from their nest. And for Gerudo, it's getting laid. From this, we can deduce that mates Gerudo will usually look for are either Hylian or Sheikah, as these are the only two races with the body type that matches Gerudo women. It also explains why absolutely all of Gerudo come across as hot to Hylians, some of whom are desperate enough to pursue these women into the desert. Though we have no proof of this is most likely true of Sheikah as well. This means that Gerudo are, quite literally, traps. Yep, that sure was a sentence. A mix between a man of another race and a Gerudo will always result in a Gerudo, never a mixed species child. This is required to ensure a continuous survival of their species. Their biology is brilliantly reflected in Gerudo culture, as well as the makeup of the town, seen in the game. Because Gerudo have to travel to find mates all over the world, their appearance is of course wildly varying in skin tones. Most commonly, they have a slightly darker shade with some variation in hair color, but on the ends of the spectrum are Gerudo with extremely dark or extremely fair skin, both easily found across town. Since no men are allowed inside Gerudo town, most of the members of the community find the concept of the opposite gender strange and alien. They don't quite know how to approach men, similar to behavior seen in young children. It's so bad, in fact, that before setting out in search of love, they actually undertake legitimate classes on relationships. I'm serious! This is serious! Stop laughing! Leaving the town for an unknown length of time, possibly forever, is of course common. As a result, it is not at all weird to encounter a Gerudo on the road or within many different towns scattered across the map. Notably, despite their presence, there are no examples of relationships of Gerudo with any races other than Hylians, which confirms our earlier suspicions about mimicry and preferred mates. What happens after finding a man seems to widely differ. Given the complete and utter lack of Gerudo minority in towns like Hateno or Lurelin, we can conclude that the vast majority of Gerudo is happy to just have a one-night stand, get pregnant and return home. Some have been known to take their lovers back to the desert, where they would settle near the town, but not in it, as men are not allowed entry even if married to a Gerudo. Finally, some Gerudo may just agree to stay with their husbands within foreign communities. This seems exceedingly rare, however. Culturally, this makes a lot of sense. Gerudo are raised with little to no concept of serious relationships. What they do know is most likely fantasized about and, as a result, pretty far from reality. On top of that, due to their militaristic society and stigma stemming from their connection to Ganon, Gerudo are extremely guarded and distrustful, especially of men. Thus, forming such lasting relationships is made much harder. Then it is further disincentivized by the town-wide ban on entry for all males. All Gerudo are well aware that even if they fall in love and marry, they will never be allowed to bring their spouses home, essentially sentencing them to near exile. Then it is no surprise that for most Gerudo, marriage is just not worth the hassle. It is hard to tell what all of that means for queer Gerudo. Game provides no evidence of them even existing, but for the sake of argument, let's assume that they do. Transitioning within Gerudo town is not possible. The stigma around Ganondorf and male Gerudo in general is just too much for that to happen. Any Gerudo attempting to come out with such a concept would be, in best case scenario, immediately shunned and exiled, and in the worst case, stabbed with spears and scimitars. However, I am not convinced how much of a problem would that be in a society like this. As already discussed, Gerudo are raised with a very poor understanding of gender and men. They barely even have a concept of what it means to be a man, and don't have examples to draw from in their society. Being an all-woman town also means that there is no societal gender divide. For Gerudo, being a very feminine jeweler is equally as natural as packing impressive ups and serving the community as a warrior. Thus, I'd hazard a guess that Gerudo generally wouldn't find it very important to them to be called a Vow instead of Vi. They can fully realize their personality as a Vi after all. Which in turn also means that Gerudo Town is, functionally, a non-binary paradise. As for lesbians or bi Gerudo... Up in the air, to be honest. Their orientation is in no way, shape or form discussed by any of the NPCs, really, and I could see it both ways. Gerudo either wouldn't be accepting of these types of relationships because leaving the town on the journey to get laid is the whole point, and they seem to be very traditional society rooted in hierarchy, or their tradition could just not care whatsoever for what women in town are doing with each other as long as they actually do leave on their journey and come back with children. Perhaps it would be even encouraged to get together for, practice sessions before going out into the world to find a man. Personally, I'm leaning towards the latter option because in a single-gender society it would just make sense that they would be allowed to get together. Though it's your choice what you prefer to believe on this matter. Since now we are firmly in the realm of pure speculation, let's talk about impact Gerudo's way of life has on the rest of Hyrule. Rito, Zora and Gorons most likely have an ambivalent attitude. Traveling Gerudo may bring in some goods, and for sure do bring in rupees. They give business to inns and merchants. They wouldn't be celebrated by any means, but are welcome. Meanwhile, if Sheikah find Gerudo attractive, and they probably do, they don't admit it. They live under very strict rules in a secluded village in the mountains that rarely gets visitors. Gerudo seem to avoid it. Perhaps it's just too out of the way of everything else. Or perhaps they aren't welcome in Kakariko. See, Sheikah have always been closely tied to the royal family of Hyrule. Given that shared history, the Ganondorf problem could have been a source of strong prejudice, even after the passing of many thousands of years. If that was the case, Gerudo would be inclined to avoid entering Kakariko whenever possible. That leaves us with Hylians, the main target of Gerudo's advances. It is reasonable to assume that Hylian perception of Gerudo would be mixed. Gerudo's preference for non-committal relationships stands in stark contrast with the Hylian way of life. This alone is bound to create not-so-nice stereotypes of them in some circles. They would be viewed as heartbreakers, easy women, and so on and so forth. On top of that are the cases of Gerudo taking men back home to the desert. While this does not happen often, it would be enough to induce strong emotional reactions from right-leaning Hylians. There would be claims of Gerudo ruining Hyrule by taking away men from Hylian women looking for husbands. Extremists would make even further leaps, claiming that Gerudo are actively putting Hylian communities in danger by reducing the number of possible defenders in case of a monster attack. That reduction would apply to the workforce as well, resulting in lowering the overall quality of life of citizens, or so they say. Do any of those claims hold water? I don't think so. As already discussed, cases of Gerudo taking Hylians back home are exceedingly rare. Their impact on the economy and defense would most likely lie within the margin of error. That is not to say that all Hylians would be hateful towards Gerudo. For all the vocal reactions of the previously discussed group, many others would simply understand that Gerudo travelers aren't really hurting anyone, even more would just not care, and some would be on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, obsessively loving Gerudo for what they are and fetishizing them. There would also be people, specifically men, who were personally hurt by a Gerudo due to their lack of understanding of how love and relationships work. Miscommunications are bound to happen in a scenario like this, and in some cases they will result in hurt feelings and a feeling of abandonment. With all that considered, can we call Gerudo societal parasites as well as biological ones? Not really, no. At least on the larger scale, they aren't exactly known for abusing other people's goodness of heart and hospitality. There could be individuals acting like this, of course, but as a whole, no.